Jeffrey Epstein. It's a name you've almost certainly heard, a name that's become synonymous with wealth, power, and, well, one of the darkest scandals of our time. This was a guy who moved in the absolute highest circles of society, but behind that luxurious curtain was a truly horrifying criminal operation. So, we're going to try and unravel this. How does a man with so much power fall so far? And maybe more importantly, why is his story still so far from over?
To really get this story, we have to start at the end, because the end is where the biggest question of all is just hanging in the air. On August 10, 2019, right before he was about to face trial on federal sex trafficking charges, Jeffrey Epstein was found dead in his cell. And this wasn't just any jail, this was one of America's most secure facilities. Officially, the story was suicide. But what most people believe, well, that's a whole different story.
I mean, just think about how unlikely all of this sounds. It wasn't just one thing that went wrong, it was like a total system meltdown. The security cameras in his unit mysteriously malfunctioned. The two guards who were supposed to be watching him, yeah, they were reportedly asleep. And crucially, just before he died, he was taken off suicide watch. For a lot of people, this just doesn't add up to a series of coincidences. It points to a really powerful belief. Epstein didn't kill himself. He was silenced.
Okay, so to understand why that suspicion is so strong, we need to back up and understand the man himself. Who exactly was Jeffrey Epstein, and how on earth did he get so much money and so much power?
You know, it's a pretty wild backstory. He actually started out as a math teacher at this elite private school back in the 70s, but his real knack was for finance. He managed to talk his way onto Wall Street and eventually started managing the fortunes of billionaires, most famously Leslie Wexner, the founder of Victoria's Secret. And through these huge commissions and just being in that world, he built his own massive empire.
And wow, what an empire it was. This wasn't just your typical rich guy rich. We're talking about a whole other level. He owned the largest private mansion in Manhattan, a massive 75,000-acre ranch out in New Mexico, a fancy apartment in Paris, and then there was the island, the one piece of property that would become the most infamous of them all. And here it is, Little St. James. This island became the very symbol of his dark world. It was a 72-acre private paradise that, as we now know, allegedly served as the epicenter of his sex trafficking ring. It was this place of incredible beauty that was hiding an unimaginable horror, a place where his powerful guests would be flown in and entertained, far, far away from any prying eyes. So here's the thing you have to understand. Epstein's real power didn't just come from his money, it came from his connections. He spent decades building this network that reached into the highest levels of global power.
And his main tool for doing this? It was his private jet, a Boeing 727 that got the very disturbing nickname, the Lolita Express, from the media. This plane wasn't just for him to travel. It was basically a shuttle service flying the world's elite to his homes, including, of course, that private island.
The flight logs and the court documents, they read like a who's who of global power. We're talking former President Bill Clinton, who flew on that jet dozens of times, Donald Trump, who was a friend of his back in the 90s, and probably most famously, Britain's Prince Andrew, whose friendship with Epstein led to a massive lawsuit and him being stripped of his royal duties. Even tech giants like Bill Gates were in his social circle. So this is the billion-dollar question, right? Why? Why were all these powerful people hanging around with this guy? And that leads us to one of the biggest theories of all, blackmail. When the FBI raided his Manhattan mansion, they found all these CDs and photos, which just fueled the speculation that Epstein was secretly recording his guests to get leverage over them. Now, to be clear, law enforcement has never confirmed some kind of official client list, but the possibility of a massive blackmail scheme just hangs over this entire case. All right, let's set aside the money and the famous names for a second, because we have to talk about the horrifying reality of what was actually happening. This wasn't just the crimes of one man. It was a sophisticated criminal enterprise.
And he absolutely was not alone. Right there at his side was Ghislaine Maxwell, a British socialite and his one-time girlfriend. And she wasn't just some accomplice along for the ride. Victims and investigators describe her as a co-mastermind, the primary recruiter for his entire trafficking operation.
Her method was just chillingly deliberate. Maxwell would allegedly use her status and her charm to approach young, often vulnerable girls, sometimes right outside their schools. She'd lure them into Epstein's world with promises of money or education or fake jobs, only to trap them in this horrific cycle of abuse.
And the crazy part is, this whole network operated without any real consequences for years. And when the law finally did start to catch up, the road to justice was, well, anything but straight.
It was just filled with shocking failures and delays.
So look at this timeline. It shows you what a long and unbelievably difficult fight this was. It really all kicked off in 2005, thanks to the incredible bravery of survivors like Courtney Wild, who filed the very first police report. But then, in 2008, a secret plea deal put together by then U.S. Attorney Alexander Acosta just shut the whole case down. It took a decade of silence until journalist Julie K. Brown's incredible reporting in 2018 for the world to finally start paying attention again, which led to his rearrest in 2019.
That 2008 plea deal, it's been called the biggest joke in judicial history, and you can see why. It was a secret deal that let Epstein plead to much lesser state charges and avoid a big federal trial. Now, the official justification was that it guaranteed at least some jail time. But what it really did was protect not just Epstein, but also his powerful, unnamed co-conspirators from ever being prosecuted. And the most shocking part? The victims had no idea this deal was even happening.
So what was the result of that so-called sweetheart deal?
This number. It says everything. 13 months. That's the actual time Epstein served of a pathetic 18-month sentence. And even that was a joke. He got work release so he could spend his days at his office and just go back to a county jail at night. It was an absolute miscarriage of justice. So Epstein's death in 2019 meant he would never stand trial. But you know what? That was not the end of this story. Not even close. The fallout is still happening today, and so many questions are still unanswered.
So where does that leave us right now?
Well, 3 major things have happened since he died. First, Ghislaine Maxwell was finally arrested, convicted, and sentenced to 20 years in prison. Second, a compensation fund was created from Epstein's estate, and it's paid out over $121 million to his victims. And third, we've started to see a very slow, very gradual release of the sealed Epstein file.
But what's really staggering is what we still don't know. Just look at this chart. It puts everything in perspective, right? While some documents have been unsealed, they are a tiny, tiny fraction of the whole story. We're talking about potentially over 1 million pages of court documents, evidence, and testimony that are still locked away, hiding the full, terrifying truth of this network.
You know, it all just comes back to this one powerful, unavoidable truth. Epstein and his friends used their incredible power and wealth to hide what they were doing for decades, to bend the justice system and to silence their victims. But, as we've all seen, they couldn't erase what they did.
And so that leaves us with this final chilling question. The story of Jeffrey Epstein is this deeply disturbing look at how power can corrupt and how justice can be bought. With over 1 million pages still sealed away, the biggest question isn't about what we know. It's about what secrets and whose names are still buried in those files.